problem that I see with this book that it may deter you from reading is, and at the end I was able to close the book, smile and say, finally I found something that I feel like the ending made the entire book. Finally, a horror book with a satisfying, a little bit feminist, unhinged ending. And that is something that a lot of authors have been trying to do lately. But I feel like every time I read those books, I can't really like them. However, this ending, I felt like it was done so right that it made the entire book worth it. Now, the book that I'm talking about is We Live Here Now by Sarah Pinborough. This is my first book by Sarah Pinborough, and it's definitely not going to be my last one. Now, this story starts with a couple that is moving to the country. They're leaving the city. I can see it in my head. They're getting in the car and they're driving to the countryside. It is a dark and rainy day. And then once they get there, the house is very dark and gloomy. And it's almost, there's like a thunderstorm in the background. That is the kind of beginning of a book that I enjoy. So when I started reading it, I'm like, this is definitely something that I'm going to enjoy. Now, this house is so big that it has its own name, and it's called Larkin Lodge. As soon as they move in, things start to move around. Emily starts to hear this weird noises and taps and footsteps. However, this only happens when Freddie is out of the house and Emily is completely alone. So at that point, Emily is starting to wonder if she's going completely crazy or if there's something in that house. Is it actually haunted? Now you have to understand that Emily was in the hospital for a really long time. She had an accident and then she has this post-sepsis condition where she is prone to hallucinations. So that's why she's not 100% sure that what she's thinking, she's seeing, and she's hearing, it's actually there because it only happens while he's away. However, after investigating and going through so much drama, because this couple, if there's one thing they are, is very messy and very toxic. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But after they're going through all those things, she starts to believe that this house is haunted, that somebody died there, and that is the person that is haunting the house and creating all the supernatural things that she's experiencing. That's all I'm going to say for the synopsis. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit more of other things that I really enjoy about the book, and then I'll tell you what I didn't like about the book and my rating. Now, this book reminded me of the vibes. Nothing with the plot or nothing like really super similar with The Haunting of Hill House or We Used to Live Here. It's just the vibes and how you feel as you're reading those books. Now, the ending, it's also a little bit ambiguous, and you know, if you've been on my channel, that's one thing I hate, but it was done so well that it was easy to come up with what really happened. There's basically two different scenarios that could happen, but one makes more sense to me in my head than the other. So it was so smartly done that it will satisfy your curiosity at the end if you really need an answer. Now, another thing I have to say about this book is that I didn't like the characters. I didn't like being in their heads. They were very toxic, very much not a couple. Like, they were just rooting for, you know, each person was rooting for themselves and not really for the couple. I just felt like, you know, the couple itself was very messy, very toxic, and I didn't like neither of them. They were not my favorite people. And usually what happens when I don't like anybody in the story, I tend to not like the book because I don't care what happens to them, because they're fictional characters and I don't care for them. So usually that is kind of something that makes me put down the book. But in this case, and this is the first time that it ever happened to me, the author did such a great job with the story and the characters that I was able to root for one person more than the other, but it was just because of the writing style. Because as people, no, they were not my favorite people. And another thing that I really enjoy is that you can come up with a lot of theories as you're reading the book. And what happened at the end, it could have been predicted. I didn't predict what was going to happen at the end, but I really thought it was satisfying. For whatever reason, that's the kind of ending where I look back and I'm like, yes, you know, it's a haunted house book, and what happens at the end, it goes perfectly with the story, and in my head it's satisfying and it makes sense. So to me, this was the best gothic horror book that I read recently, and it's definitely one that it has a mystery intertwined that makes it a lot more interesting for my brain to want to keep reading and find out what really happened. Now I have a list of things that I didn't like about this book. One of the things is, I already mentioned, the toxic relationship. I just don't enjoy seeing that in books. It is so normal today for people to be toxic to each other that I think the last thing I need is to read it on a book. So I didn't like that, but it's something very personal and something that is kind of a turn off for me. Another thing that I didn't like, and it goes with the toxic part, is the amount of gaslighting. I can't read a book that it's all like, you know, it's sunny outside, you're crazy, it's not sunny, I see a cloud. And you're like, no, there's no, the amount of like gaslighting that it's happening between this couple, and you know, the disbelief of the husband of what she's saying, she's seeing, and and it's a big part of the book. Another thing that I already mentioned is being in the head of the characters. These characters are very unlikable in general. Every character in this book is very unlikable, so I just did not like to listen to some of the monologues they had in their heads, because that's how you learn about them, with this internal monologues. But to me, they just weren't that interesting. Another thing that I thought it was really funny, and this is completely my fault, is that in the beginning, and if you read this book, you'll see what part this is, but there's something that Freddie says, and I think it's in the very first chapter, because this is in 3 different POVs. Emily, the husband, Freddie, and a raven, and it will make sense at the end why the raven has a POV. But the part that I was like, okay, I know exactly where this book is going, and I hate every minute of it. I don't know why, but I thought this book was gonna go into a completely different direction, and something that and I'm not gonna say what it is, but it's because it might give you the idea too, so you'll have to keep reading to figure out if you're wrong or right. But I feel like this is one of those tropes that I've seen in different horror movies. It was kind of a trend a few years ago, and now not really, but it's meant to be creepy, but I was sure it was going somewhere that it didn't. So I guess that's a good thing for the author. She was able to trick me from the beginning. But I have to say that I kind of made it harder for myself, because from that point on, until I figure out that that's not where it was going, I was just kind of dragging and reading it just to prove that I was right, and not because I was so interested in the story. I feel like again, this is completely me and not the book's fault. Another thing that I didn't like about it is the unreliable narrator. That's part of it. And you don't know in what way it's unreliable, but that's one of the things I really don't like. However, it was done right. So I think in this case, it actually fit the story, and I didn't feel like somebody was lying to my face throughout the book. But it did leave me thinking that I can't believe anything that these people are saying. So I almost was always suspecting, depending on what they were saying, is what my suspicions were. And the main thing and the main problem that I see with this book that it may deter you from reading is that it's very slow. Even though it's very atmospheric, it's very, I'm gonna say the first 40 to 50% of the book, it's super slow. I understand that it's setting up the stage, it's kind of giving you all the creeps and all the things that are happening in the house in order to get you to wonder what really what really is happening in this house. But I thought that it was really slow, and it could have been done in a different way, I think. But for a lot of people, that wasn't the problem, because by then they were really invested in the story. So if you really want to get to the ending of this book, and if you really want to, I don't know, get at this refreshing feeling of a horror book with a very overdone trope, like a haunted house trope, I think that you just have to remember that it will be very slow in the beginning, but it's building up to something that, to me, is very interesting. And finally is the idea that a lot of things weren't resolved at the end. Not everything really ties down to what happened. And that it's okay. I didn't feel like there were any plot holes, but I did feel like there were I had a lot of questions after the book was done that I wasn't able to have the answer. And maybe I need to reread it because there are clues that I missed in the beginning. So even though this wasn't a fast-paced book, it was a really great story, and the plot was really smart, and I thought that it was done right. Now, you may read the story and think, oh, well, that's not what I thought the house was, or that's not what I was thinking that the raven was, or that's not. And so that is going to depend on the way that you interpret the story. But to me, this is the kind of ending that I really like in this kind of book, and that it kept me reading. And at the end, I was able to close the book, smile, and say, finally, I found something that I feel like the ending made the entire book. So let me know if you are planning to read it. This book will be available, I believe, on May 20th. It will be released. And up to this point, I think it has an average rating of 4.25. So if you're looking for something creepy that you either can read during the summer and just, have early Halloween, maybe for Summerween or something like that, I think this is a really great option. But remember, if you are kind of a fast-paced person that really don't like to wait and when things get a little bit slower and more character driven, if that's not your vibe, this might not be for you. But if you're curious, I enjoyed it and I think you should give it a try. To me, this was a 4-star book. Couldn't be a 5-star because of the things that I mentioned before, but it was definitely worth the read, and I devoured this book in one day.